Look at this, sold out. Can you believe this stuff?
So they were supposed to deliver it in October.
This is going to be an update on the kettlebell shortage of 2020.
I just want my shoe. Give me my shoe, please.
Then it was supposed to be November. No. Then December.
Give me my PlayStation. Am I wrong for wanting this, bro? I mean, everything just sucks lately.
Take my money. Take my money. I don't want it. Give me my shoe.
Every time I check my email, it's stuck on this right here. I don't even know what that means.
Tonight, one word sums up the feeling along every line of the supply chain: frustration.
Well, the shortages and delays in the global supply chain threaten a total paralysis.
When the pandemic hit, businesses anticipated that the COVID recession was coming. They thought that demand was going to drop. But something funny happened. The opposite of what all of these businesses and economists predicted happened. Demand exploded. People bought things like crazy, and now supply chains are choking on that record demand. Everyone has had the experience of not being able to get something, and everyone has had the experience of paying more for something. Prior to the pandemic, most of us just took it for granted that we could get things ever faster. E-commerce made it seem like everything was right at our doorstep. But that obscures what was a 14,000-mile journey halfway around the world. It took months, and when you add up all the automation, all the algorithms, all of the hundreds of people who had to touch those goods or transport them in some way, it's in total one of the most complicated endeavors that human beings ever engage in, and yet it happens millions of times per day, and we take it for granted because all of that has been rolled behind this ultimate convenience of just one-click e-commerce shopping. But the pandemic showed us just how unsustainable and unrealistic that expectation is. So consumer electronics like USB chargers, they feel like they are readily available to us, right? We can get it the same day.
USB chargers are an interesting product. They're relatively simple. The key thing is those chargers don't sell for a lot, so you have to keep your labor costs down and you have to really focus on efficiency.
The invention of the shipping container and ocean-going shipping made it cheap enough to move manufacturing wherever labor costs were lowest.
Global supply chains have really brought us a cornucopia of products that we might not otherwise be able to have as much variety as or as attractive costs that we see. When you buy a product off of a store shelf or online, that's actually the tail end of a journey that might have begun a year ago in a factory that might be half a world away. Vietnam has been attractive because of relatively low-cost labor.
If we take the example of a simple USB charger, it's assembled in a factory in Vietnam, and then usually it's placed in a shipping container that travels on a barge to an ocean-facing port. There it's loaded onto a ship for a trip across the Pacific Ocean. The trip across the Pacific Ocean can take anywhere from 20 to 30 days. Working on a ship can be like living in an office that you can't ever leave. It's high stakes and it's often mundane and boring. Because sailors tend to be confined to these ships, and it's almost impossible for outsiders to get on or off of them, this is a part of the supply chain that remains invisible to most of us.
A watch lookout is done visually and also by radar.
Fortunately, some of these sailors like to record their experiences.
The watch officer is in charge of the navigation and overall status of the ship. Safe navigation of the ship is the highest priority.
The fog is so thick in this area, we can't really see around us, so we have to use a radar.
Each one of these container ships can carry up to 10,000 containers, but they can have a crew as few as 20. So it puts enormous pressure on each sailor to do their job, because if anything goes wrong, the results are going to be catastrophic for supply chains.
The last thing we want is containers falling into the sea if we ever run into bad weather. We keep watch on the overall conditions of the ship, checking the mooring lines and looking out for suspicious activities like stowaways or pirates. Sea conditions like this can last for days. The relentless pounding, the never-ending pitch and roll. I can only describe it as living under a 24/7 airplane turbulence.
The biggest container ships are as big as a skyscraper laid on its side. And one reason they've gotten so big is that when you look at all the costs, crew, fuel, etc., the bigger your ship, the more money you can make on every container. The cheaper it is, ultimately, to ship these goods. But the bigger you make these ships and the more efficient you make these supply chains, the worse things go when there's a bottleneck at one of these single points of failure.
The 400-metre-long Ever Given got stuck on Tuesday morning, running aground in high winds reportedly after a power failure on board.
More than a dozen ships are waiting to pass through the Suez Canal. That's one of the world's busiest trade routes.
And each day of backlog, more than $9 billion worth of goods is stuck. And that translates to about $400 million an hour.
More and more shipping containers have been flowing toward us from Asia. And of course, we're not really shipping stuff back.
Now, we see a large number of ships in San Pedro Bay. Eventually that cargo is going to land. Eventually it's going to hit the beaches.
As ports get bigger, as more and more flows through the biggest ports, they become single points of failure in a global supply chain that used to be more robust.
The Port of Los Angeles and neighboring Port Long Beach represent 40% of our U.S. imports and nearly 30% of America's exports, showing just how critical this gateway is to the American economy. We have more than 15,000 international longshore and warehouse union members that work on the docks.
My job as a longshore worker is to help in the operations that move cargo through the terminals on Long Beach and Los Angeles ports. What I typically do is drive a UTR. That stands for utility tractor rig. It's just kind of a compact truck that's strong enough to haul the tonnage. So what I do is I take cargo from point A to point B to a designated spot out in the yard to be stacked for outside truckers to come pick up to take to the retailer's destination.
We've been averaging 900,000 container units for 14 consecutive months. That used to be one really good month in our peak season.
We use these giant ship-to-shore cranes to unload containers. Typically, it takes 3 to 5 days, but with all of the problems we're having right now, productivity is suffering big time. It's taking up to 2 weeks to process a ship that would typically take 3 to 5 days.
Once a container's on the dock, a mix of humans, robots, and software is going to be picking it up and moving it to stacks of containers inside the port itself, where it's going to be sorted and resorted so that it's available for trucks or rail that are going to move it out of the port.
There is no room. We've gone even higher in the piles for our ground cranes to have to dig through, and we've also used every square inch available on our ports in order to put containers, and it's very, very hard to move them in a timely manner.
Ports are in some ways amazingly democratic places, which means that they're often very contentious places. You have the longshoremen, that's an extremely strong union. You have the terminal operators, you have the city of Los Angeles or Long Beach who actually owns the port.